correctly, my cousin, his daughter sent me a text and said that he had just passed, and she said he was in my arms. And my brother said, "Isn't that the way we'd all like to go? Is being held by somebody who loves you, and then of course going to someone who loves you." So he is in a better place today. We are still in Genesis. We're in chapter 6. We're going to be in Genesis for a while, but we're in chapter 6. And some of this now will start moving just a little bit quicker and so on. But I think Genesis chapter 6, to me, if you're going to study Genesis, you've got to study the first 6 or 7 chapters altogether, especially the first 6. When you separate it out, it becomes confusing to me. But if you look at those first 6 chapters as like one section, you got to read the whole thing. And when you talk about it, you talk about the whole thing together because of the way that it overlaps and interacts. Now, with that being said, there are things that it talks about so that it helps to describe a little bit from 1 and 2 over into 6 and different things. And so when you look at that, it's like, but is there a clear and definite explanation of everything that's going on? And the answer would be no. So, but we have the parts that we want to look at. I mean, God gave us the parts that he thought were important to us so that we could see that, one, who he is. I mean, his power, his might. What's the word that I'm looking for? When you put up with something for a long time, his patience. There you go. His patience. We think about that. And I mean, and so, especially when we bring this down to chapter 6. Now, last week, we kind of ran through the genealogies, and I'm going to ask, did anybody go back and add up the years and so on to kind of check that out? That it talks about from, boy, I'm disappointed because I thought surely there'd be 1 or 2 that would go home and check that out, especially in the age of calculators, because when I first figured it out, there wasn't no such thing as calculators. I saw a post last night from a friend of mine that said, I may not know anything about TikTok and all this, but I can write in cursive and do multiplication without a calculator. Just saying. So when we look at this, though, and especially when we get into chapter 6 right here, to me, there's a lot of interesting things that are going on. So let's get into it. Now, it came about when men began to multiply, okay, on the face of the earth, on the face of the land, excuse me, and daughters were born to them. Specific reference to man, daughters. Daughters were born to man. Now then, I could stop right and just go backwards for just a moment. And do you remember what Eve said when she conceived and gave birth to Cain? God has blessed me with a son, because that didn't happen, apparently, to this. Now then, goes back also to the idea that, and I go back to chapter 1 on this, where he created male and female, boom, and then he comes back and he says, I need somebody to work in the garden. So he formed man from the dust of the ground. So is this formation from the dust of the ground the daughters? And like I say, this all goes together. And you can't study the first without studying on over in it, so that you try to grab this idea. But anyway, he says that daughters were born to them. And this is the men. That the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. Well, there's got to be more than one, right? So there's multiple. So where did these sons of God come from? So, like I say, this story, you have to take these first 6 chapters, and then you got to begin to tie things together in this regard. And I'm going to be truthful. That's where, when I start looking at this, that's where this, to me, that God created the form that were maybe the sons of God, and then he formed man from the dust of the ground. And the sons of God saw that they were beautiful, so they took wives from them. This was an interesting comment to me. This is an interesting phrase. Whomever they chose. Think about that for just a moment. In our day and time, does that sound like slavery? I'll take what I want. Who's got anything to say so in that regard? So, once again, and I don't know, I'm just looking at what I read, and then with my thought and the way that I've been trained in today's society and different things like this, I mean, you look at it and it's like, it's an interesting phrase, though, to be placed there, that they just took whoever they wanted. There was no say so. That's what I think. I mean, I when I look at it, and then of course, like we said, because Eve thought that it had to be the act of God that she had sons and the daughters of men, because it says right here that the sons of God and the daughters of man. Man was what was formed. Now, we're going to look at this idea of what was formed as we get closer to when he talks about what's going to happen at the flood. And I want us to pay attention in that regard as we get there with this. And so we look at this and we find that God is not happy. Can we say that might be an understatement? My spirit. Now look at I got the NASB, New American Standard. Spirit is capitalized. Is that the way it is in everything? When we see the Spirit and with a capital S in it like that in our readings, what does that have reference to? Spirit of God, which we relate as the Holy Spirit, right? And so he says, my spirit will not strive. And what does strive mean? What does that word mean? Here's a definition. I used to give you things to, look up and down. What does the word strive mean? Huh?
It says contend.
Intend? Contend?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what does contend or strive mean?
My spirit will not remain.
Remain? Okay, if you look up the word strive and find the definition of strive means that you are forced work to make something happen. Think about that. Has the Spirit of God been trying and working to make man better than what he has? He's been striving, he's been endeavoring, he's been working, he's been trying to. But what does God say? I'm through. Isn't that basically what God is saying right here? Not going to happen. I'm through. There's some other parts of this then as we read through here. It will not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. So the Spirit of God is working, but what does he say? That the Spirit is there, but what is man? He's not just spirit, but he's also flesh. Now then, how does this tie into, quote, our New Testament teaching, or is this part of the entire book, so that who came in the form of man in what? In flesh, to the earth to endure. Wasn't that Jesus Christ? You see how the table's being set right here? You see the importance of Genesis in really understanding what happens later on. There's going to be something else right here as we come down through here, because that will tie back to Jesus as well. So I'm not going to strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. He putting a time limit on man? Okay. Because what has he seen? Now, interesting that he makes this comment. Because what's he getting ready to do? Huh?
Getting ready to destroy mankind.
He's getting ready to destroy the earth. He's going to wipe out everybody. What difference does it make put a time limit on it now if you're getting ready to destroy everything? Is that not, am I the only one that seems kind of strange too? Unless, God always has a plan, right? Does God always know what? Yeah. Okay, so let that make sense that God, even though he tells himself, I'm through. I'm going to destroy all of it. Can he make it over again if he wanted to? Well, yeah, he made it the first time. Took 6 days, took his time. Because he could have done it in a day, probably, if he just really wanted to, but, So, in this combination then of, because we're talking about sons of God, daughters of man, spirit won't strive with man, and then we go, and he's going to number his days, and then we talk about the Nephilim. Now, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And if you look up the word Nephilim, took a little time and just kind of scratched through some of this and so on, giant, or in the Hebrew, depending on who your scholars are, blah, blah, I get that. But it's accepted as the fallen one. So the definition could be giant and or fallen one, usually used in the same reference to that regard. Was on the earth in those days. Interesting. And also afterwards. After what? Hadn't talked about a flood yet, has he? So they're on the earth in these days, and they'll be on the earth in afterward. Now and afterward. Interesting. And once again, then, we go back to this idea of when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, these were mighty men who were of men of renown. Now then, if you go back, somebody take Numbers 13:33. Numbers 13:33. Yes. Oh, you got it? Okay, you take Numbers 13:33, and then I need somebody to take Ezekiel 32:27. So Numbers 13:33. And what does it say, Anthony?
There also we saw the net. We became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight.
Okay. And Anthony, who makes that statement right there? Where is that coming from? These are the spies that they sent over, and this is when they're talking about it, and these spies come back and say, we're like grasshoppers. You can't believe. Nephilim. Where are these guys, where they talked about? Back in Genesis in chapter 6. They were on the earth then, afterwards. All right? I mean, God tells us that they're there. And Ezekiel 32:27.
Nor do they lie beside the fallen heroes of the uncircumcised, who went down to Sheol with their weapons of war, and whose swords were laid under their heads. But the punishment for their iniquity rested on their bones, though the terror of these heroes was once in the land of the living.
All right. And this was, they think, referenced once again because of the way that it talks about the men of renown that were, and so in this regard. But these were what? The uncircumcised. Now then, Cain represents what? Bad side, right? We were talking about good and bad. Cain represents the bad. Abel represented good. If these were, in that regard, sons of God, could we have men of renown that were bad, the uncircumcised is talked about here? And if Abel had sons and daughters, which we don't know, we're assuming that, could those be the good of the? That's just one thought. Do I have anything to back that up? Nope. Other than just reading the scripture and understanding that with the Nephilim, that there were some that were good, there were some that were bad in that regard. So, but we don't have to, just wonder, well, what happened to them? Well, we understand what they actually, and God says that they're going to be before and afterward. All right, so we know that God kept them. Now then, as we get to this, how does that work with the flood? I have absolutely no idea. All I know is that when that flood happens, there's a whole bunch of things that I ain't understanding. Because of the way I've been raised and what I see today and everything, and this picture's in my head according to what I have. And I don't know what that looked like. Now, I will say this. How many of you have been to the Ark in Kentucky? Okay. If you get the chance, seriously, brothers and sisters, the main thing that I got from it was just the mere size. And we're getting ready to talk about that in just a moment. And you think that 4 guys put that together. Took them 100 years. But 4 guys. And one of them had to work for a while before his sons got big enough to, start dragging him, bringing him nails or whatever. Think about that for a moment. We'll get there, okay? But let's go back to this. So this idea then of Nephilim that is put here, we find comes back to us later in Scripture. We don't have to wonder, and we don't have to, it's there. And they were, okay. Is Goliath a man of renown? Everybody know about him? Well, yeah, everybody knows who Goliath is, and so on. Was he a good guy? No. So you understand that the Nephilim were good and bad. And I think that these next verses, because there's a word that jumped out to me, and I guess the reason why is because I listened to a couple of guys that are, well, one of them's former head of, certain departments of justice and different things like this. But there's a word that jumps out at me. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that this is sad, every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Think about what that says. And we don't have to look very far in our society today to understand this concept. that people literally just, their mind is corrupted to the point that they just think about. And when we say doing evil to someone, stealing, cheating, I mean, I told somebody this week, I was talking to a gentleman at Walmart. He was wheelchair and sit at the door checking and everything. Great individual. And we were talking, and I told him about when I was teaching at East Central, had a class of 38 students. And something came up, and I said, well, that goes back to your morals and ethics. And they all looked at me with a totally blank face. And I said, write the definition for morals. How many do you think could write me a definition? If you say none, you're absolutely right. That was a new word to them. And the concept of having morals, what do you mean? I'll do what I want to. If we don't look to God for our moral code and conduct, then who's God? And then if our founding fathers had it right, that all men are created equal, Anthony, don't you tell me what to do. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, because you're your God, you're your God, I'm my God, you're your God, who's right? Do we have to answer to a God that created? And so what had happened to man at this time? What's happened? Are those men, remember now at the end of chapter 5, where it says that they were seeking, and man began to seek. He said, where was he? Because why? They were going away from God. And so when you look at this, that only evil continually can you. Now, is God still on the earth? Let's answer that question. Is God still on the earth? And I think because of the way that it's written and some other aspects of it, that yes, he is. Now then, the Lord said, now who's he talking to? Who's he talking to? We say, well, it's for no, he's talking to somebody, because it's in quotation marks. And yes, we get the opportunity to read this and so on, but who is he talking to? The Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land. Remember that handful of dirt? Formed him. From man to animals. What the animals do. Think about that for just a moment. Now remember when we talked about that God brought all the animals to Adam to see if there was a suitable mate? Were animals different then than they are today? Let's face it, women, how many of you in here, if an animal came up to you and sat down beside you and started talking to you, wouldn't freak out and be gone? You wouldn't sit there and carry on, oh yeah, it's good to see you. Come on. It wouldn't make any, you would be looking for help somewhere. All right? So, is there communication between man and Anna in this regard? And the answer is yeah, because why? They were all made in the same way for the same stuff. Because God made them from dirt. So because they're earth, now I want you to think about what's getting ready to happen so we can put this together. What's he going to do? He's going to destroy the earth, dirt. He's going to destroy man, who was formed from dirt. Animals who were formed from dirt. Oh, because why? Has flesh. And that's something that we look at right here. And the word that pops out in there is because the things that had flesh, he's going to destroy. I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky. For I am sorry that I have made them. think about God saying that things are, I'm sorry that what was I thinking? Why didn't you guys tell me not? He is sick. But there's that 3-letter word. It can be good or it can start wars. But Noah found favor in the eyes of God. How did Noah find favor in the eyes of God? There had to be, and we don't have reference to this. Now, we can go back to all the way back to Cain and Abel and bringing their offering and different things like that. Was there a law and or a code? Because if you think about it, and we've talked about this many times, but if there is no law, how can you break the law? So there's something here that God has transposed, because the killing of Abel was totally unacceptable, because the blood from Abel the ground cried with his blood before God. So what is there right here? What was the law? We don't know, but we know that God had something that he expected from man. Since he had created man, would you expect man to honor and to regard him? We have Jesus Christ, whom he gave us and allowed him to die so that we could be reconciled, given worth, so that we could be classified as children of God. Do we appreciate and recognize what we have? You that are here this morning do. If other people did, this place would be packed. Am I wrong about that? But Noah found favor. And I think I like this because this one's short. These are the records of the generations of Noah. And what have you got? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's it. Because why? It's getting ready to end right there before it starts. These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. And here's the kicker. Noah walked with God. Now, we reference today that we walk with Christ in a spiritual sense and so on. But in this regard, has God been on the earth? Yeah. Did he walk? Enoch walked with him, because what did God do? God took Enoch, right? So we know he was walking with him and so on. So is Noah walking with God? And I'm going to say, because of the history prior to this great event that's happening, that he was, and God just wasn't appreciated by anybody else on the face of the earth. Kind of getting that way. I mean, if we look at our society, when man just doesn't look to God, then who does he look to? And so it becomes an issue in regard. Now, the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with, and here was the word that jumped out at me, because I don't really ever remember reading this and so on. But what's that word? My version says violence. It doesn't say sin. It says violence. When you think of violence, what do you think of? I can tell you that Mr. Leon Warren, sitting back there, was in Korea, and he saw violence. Others have served and so on, and they understand what violence is. And when you look at, and we restrict that to war, But in this regard, but our society, it's a good thing that we're really, of course, last year, most on record, 378 law enforcement officers were killed in the United States. This year at the 1st of September, and of course, this is what's interesting, shows that crime rate is decreased in the United States, but they left out the top 30 cities in the United States. The 30 largest cities in the United States were not added into that crime report when they put that out there. And that's not coming from me. That's coming from a former head of the FBI who has been silenced, dismissed from his position, and so on. So far this year, at the beginning of September, there have been 275 law enforcement officers that had their lives have been taken, and we still got 4 months left. So they're on pace for another record year. Is our world becoming violent? Is our country becoming violent? Because we do not have regard. Now think about what was happening there. God was there. Would people walking with God? No, they refused to walk with God. In our society, we have laws that were set up actually by God. The men that set up this country took the Bible and used it. But what are people doing? Ignoring that and doing what? What they see fit. Is there any difference between then and now? Or is it just a difference in time? Human nature of man has not changed. This part where he says that only continually evil all the time, can that be true of man today? And as we look at it, as we draw away from God, we have to say, yeah. God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh, now then, remember what we said a while ago? Who was flesh? Well, he formed all the animals from the dirt with flesh. He formed man from dirt that had flesh. So when he talks about this idea that all flesh, because we said that there was something different in this regard, then everything had corrupted their way upon the earth. All flesh. This was not limited to just, as we refer to, mankind. Then God said to Noah, the end of, once again, he doesn't say man, what does he say? The end of all, say the word, flesh. The end of all flesh. So what's he talking about? He's not just talking about man, he's talking about anything that he formed with flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with, and there's that word again, filled with what? Doesn't say sin, violence. The world is full of violence. Where did that violence start that we really know for sure? When Cain killed Abel. And I want you to remember something as we go through this, because where has that led? Cain killing Abel has led to what? What does the scripture say? Violence he ever made man. And now then he will do, what's he getting ready to do? I'm going to destroy all flesh. Because of them, and behold, it's filled with violence because of them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. And oh, by the way, just kind of, in a sense, we continue on down, make for yourself an ark, go for wood. You shall make the ark with rooms. I'd never really noticed that before either, that he had this thing segmented off. We had a hotel on water right here, you know. And shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This one caught me this week because we have a job going where they built a basement. And so you got to dig down, pour the concrete. And so we've had he's a great guy, working, trying to put a sealer on that concrete that is kind of tar-like. Oh my word. Is anybody in here ever smeared and worked on something like that? I can tell you they spent about 50 years trying to get that pitch on there because it's inside and outside. Think about that. And I'm serious. If not, go home, get you a bucket of tar and try smearing it on. And then think about something that's almost as long as a football field, almost as wide as a football field, and 45 feet high. Ivan, going to take you a while. And I'm not sure they had spray guns that would shoot that stuff on there back then, you know. But I'm sure that they did have more tools than what we give them credit for. But I also want to point out something else because I like this. Make for yourself an ark out of gopher wood. What does that mean? Oh, wait a minute. It doesn't say, Anthony. It doesn't say don't use that.
Use this, it gets rid of the opportunity. to use anything else.
But it's all right to use music because it doesn't say not to. Right? Isn't it the same thing? But he told us that we want to take the Lord's Supper, that we want to come together and pray. We want to come together and sing praises, and we want to get in the Word. And then later he says, don't add to or take away. Does God have to tell you everything he don't want? When you go in, and we've used this before, you go into a restaurant and you sit down and you open up the menu. Do you read them everything on there you don't want? Well, I don't want the eggs Benedict. I don't want that. Do you do that? We say, well, Larry, you're being stupid. I'm good at that. When God said, I want this, did he have to tell you, I don't want all this other stuff? God tells us what he wants. When Jesus says, love one another, what does he want? But for some reason, we think that we can't. Oh, does that go back to the idea of what mankind had done here? Is that I gradually just, well, God, yeah, God, I got you. And I'll do what I want to. Any difference in then and now? Were people worshiping things back then? Sure. But they were doing what? They did it the way they wanted to. Has human nature changed? No. Hadn't changed. We're the same way that those people were then. World may have changed because of what God did. But the nature of mankind has not changed. So you're going to make this ark out of gopher wood. Don't ask anything else. I said gopher wood. Parents, you tell your kid to come in at midnight. Well, you didn't say not to come in at 3. What would you do? Well, my dad, when I woke up, would have told me, explained it to me again, you know. When God says something, that's what he wants. He doesn't want any input from something that he formed out of a handful of dirt. That keeps me humble. And then covering this thing with pitch, putting all the rooms in it. My goodness. This is, You've been there, I know. And I'm with you. It's just, yeah. And you know, something else that goes along with this, because when you think about the process, how long did it take him to build it? 100 years. He was 500 when he's given this commandment. Flood comes when he's 600. So he worked on it 100 years. Somebody want to tell me the word that I'm trying to think of right here about keeping, tenacity or focus. Keeping your focus. Remember when we're told that you keep your focus on who? Jesus. And what did Noah keep his, could he have been distracted in 100 years? I'm sure he could have. And especially when other people are talking about you, other people, and they're doing their own thing. And what are you doing? Because you got to get this thing built, and you spend 100 years, and your focus, does that, think about that in itself. What does that say about Noah? Huh? He was dedicated and a faithful servant of the Lord. To maintain for 100 years his focus and that vision for in I'm going to use this word in this regard of his salvation. Okay? So when we talk about things and we look at things, and you're tested with things sometimes, maybe we should think about Noah and what he went through. And think about how he stayed focused, because most of us won't even live. Most of us may not live 100 years. I don't know. And he stayed focused for 100 years to finish the project that God had given him. All right. So we'll kind of start in verse 14 there next week and continue on and looking at this thing and go from there. And I want to thank you all. And hey, get in. Don't take my word for things, please. But get in the Word, read, and put this story together, and you'll find out that, wow, makes the New Testament as well come alive, because you understand so many more things. Thank you, and see you next week. All right.